Funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board.
No matter how you look at it, animal agriculture helps Nebraska's economy. The livestock industry provides increased tax revenues for schools and community services. Livestock enterprises also create jobs while contributing to existing businesses such as local banks and grocery stores. A thriving livestock industry helps maintain our current way of life, but also provides opportunities for the next generation of farm families. The Nebraska Soybean Checkoff helps to raise awareness of the importance of animal agriculture to Nebraska.
Market Journal, television for making agricultural business decisions, is a presentation of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln Extension, where you can know how, know now. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine, and major funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board. The Soybean Checkoff, growing opportunity from the ground up.
Welcome to this week's edition of Market Journal. I'm Jeff Wilkerson. On this episode, Mike Briggs looked at profit hurdles in the cattle feeding sector. Elwynn Taylor describes how Iowa's corn and soybean crops are shaping up. Galen Erickson talks about pricing and using silage. And Tamara Jackson-Ziems discusses stock rot issues in hail-damaged cornfields. Mike Briggs is our marketing analyst this week. The latest Sterling Beef Profit Tracker shows the average feedlot lost almost $58 a head on each cow it sent to market for the week ending August 31st. That's an improvement of just more than $1.50 from the previous week and more than $50 a head better from the same time a year ago. The heat that burned across the Midwest last week played tricks on the grain markets, with more volatility spreading into this week, as soybeans especially rode the roller coaster Tuesday and Wednesday. While corn hasn't been quite as turbulent, there's little chance it'll stay quiet until harvest moves in. When we talked with Mike Wednesday morning, I asked how he was feeling with space open in the feedlot, but a big crop possibly around the corner.
I feel awful and depressed, and I'm really negative. There you go. We've got the fewest number of cattle around here we've had since the 80s. There's virtually, people like to use the term margin. There's no margin in cattle. It's all negative. Everybody's waiting for the big come in the market. I don't know if it's going to happen. Personally, I'm really bearish. The information that I look at says supplies of market-ready cattle will be bigger in September and October than they were last year. Demand always falls off after Labor Day, always. And I don't think this is going to be any different. You've already seen a decline in export demand. So if you actually do have greater supplies of market-ready cattle in September and October than you had last year, and you have declining demand, you got a train wreck coming, and it really makes me nervous. As far as corn and things like that, I think we've got a nice corn harvest coming, and I think that's really going to help the feeding industry, because feeding $6, $7, and $8 corn, we've all found out the hard way that doesn't work.
That being said, the volatility probably isn't over in this corn market. The heat could come back next week, and then there's a threat of a frost. Do you just buy corn as you need it at this point?
Oh, I absolutely would. I absolutely would not extend my corn coverage. Some people say, well, the low's already in. I don't know. I think the corn crop has been primarily made. Yeah, you might lose a little test weight. Things won't be quite as good as you'd like, but the corn's still going to be there. There's been a little bit of harvesting of seed corn. They talk about huge yields in the seed corn, and I think the commercial corn will be the same way.
Feeder cattle market has put in a few dollars here, as I was saying before. Is there any chance that might be a top, though?
I kind of wonder that. I don't know, I could be wrong. We ran the feeder cattle up pretty hard, but if you have another round of losses here in September and October, I gotta think that makes some people take their foot off the gas a little bit, but maybe not. Maybe with the cheaper corn, people are just gonna keep piling into it. I know that the smaller guys, the guys under 1,000 that the government doesn't track but once a year, these guys that have a cornfield in their backyard are not gonna be happy they can't sell it for $7, and they're gonna feed it. And so I think you're going to see a lot of little feed yards with a lot of cattle in them.
We talk about cheaper corn. Where does it need to be to make it, maybe not even profitable, but to get closer to a break even, do you feel?
It's got to get down 4 1/4 or less. And I don't know if it can do that. I think it will once harvest starts. I think you'll have an opportunity to do that, but I could be totally wrong.
When do you see, as far as the calendar goes, when the time frame might be that you start turning it around? Is there a time that maybe early 2014 you could see some positive margins?
I would like to think that we'll be able to buy some cattle this fall with the cheaper corn and maybe feeder cattle kind of reining themselves in a little bit price-wise. There'll be some opportunity there to do some things. Otherwise, it may be after the first of the year when the next wave of feeder cattle come. It's going to have to be during a time when there's a lot of supply of feeder cattle or relatively higher supply of feeder cattle, and that's usually October or January.
Not much interest to place cattle at this point?
No, not from our point, because the margins are too far negative. I don't see the come in the market that everybody else is apparently seeing. And there's no reason for a customer or an investor feeder to want to feed. So it's really difficult right now. It's probably, like I said, it's as difficult as I've seen it since the 80s.
What's the answer to the demand problem? I mean, is there one that you see?
It's all price. Beef has always been a premium price protein. It's always going to be a premium price protein, but it's way up there now. And it's to the point where people are just switching out of it. And that's one of the things I have the problem with the profitability in the feeder fat cattle. These prices that you need, where they need to be for us to be profitable, the consumer is not going to pay. Yeah. So there's where the head button comes, and I'm not sure. I think the consumer is going to switch out. So we're going to really struggle with making a margin in this industry because we're not going to be able to price the live cattle high enough that they'll be profitable because the consumer won't buy it.
Grain markets could continue to be interesting with more heat in the forecast this weekend and due to the September crop report, which the USDA will release at 11 a.m. Central on Thursday. A quarter of Iowa's corn and nearly a fourth of its soybeans are rated as poor or very poor, according to the latest USDA state report. The triple-digit heat that recently passed through Midwestern regions was the hottest for that state since July 2012. Farmers there have faced a difficult growing season after delayed planting due to moisture and now trying to keep the crop alive due to lack of it. What might be even more concerning for those who got the crop in the ground late is the possibility of an early frost. On Wednesday, we talked with Elwynn Taylor from Iowa State, who said the average date for the first mild frost in western Iowa is October 4th, while the first killing frost normally comes October 14th. Less than 1 out of 10 years, that hard freeze has come before October 1st, but never before September 22nd. With these hurdles in front of the country's largest corn and soybean producing state, we wanted to see how Iowa's crops were holding up. Elwynn said the deluge of water at the beginning of the season started a mirrored pattern with one of the worst growing years in the state's history.
We looked at how atypical that was. Does this happen very often? Well, it had happened very similar back in 1947. 1947 was a year that was very, very wet, and planting was delayed. There were some other interesting things happened in 1947 that also happened again this time and made us get even more concerned. First, 1947 turned out to be the third worst corn yield year in history for much of the Corn Belt, especially the western half. Second, when we got to May, we had snow, record snow, in fact, in 1947. That record wasn't broken until 2013 in May. We had another similarity to 1947, and that was temperatures went from snow within 2 weeks to 100-degree temperatures. We broke those temperature records, in Iowa at least, this year. Well, it did persist just like 47 right up until the end of June. And then the rain quit like it did in 47, but in July of 47 we had a switch to above normal temperatures, 10 to 15 degrees above normal. It persisted all through August and into September. Fortunately, we didn't have that kind of heat this year, and it at least has been the salvation to keep it from being as bad as 1947.
Wondering what that heat did last week, though, Elwynn. It was nasty here in Nebraska, but in Iowa, where there isn't much irrigation, what did it do to the crops?
Well, of course, by the third day of temperatures over 94 degrees, you begin losing several percent of your potential that's left for your crop each day. When I say several percent, I'm talking about more than 4% per day. And so by the time we got to day 5, we had taken quite a bite off of the crop, especially the crop that was somewhat water stressed. We did have some water stress in more of the crop than you would expect, but it's because of how wet the spring had been. A lot of people planted under conditions that weren't ideal, and the crops rooted poorly because of how the soil reacted to the planting. Some places the rooting was shallow because the moisture was so high in the soil that roots didn't grow well. And so we did have some limited root development. Other places did quite well, even through the heat, where the roots were down their full 5 feet.
With that late planting, Elwynn, how big is the threat now of an early frost damaging the crop?
It's a real concern to a lot of people for both corn and for soybeans that we might have a frost situation that would catch things when they were just too green or not mature enough. And that has happened sometimes in the past. It's always a disaster if it happens very early. And of course, even if it happens rather near the normal time, this year, that would be too early for many of our fields of both corn and soybean.
With those things in mind, is there a target that you or other experts are looking at for yield in corn or soybeans?
We pretty much agree with what has been the opinion of both the markets and of the USDA, that the U.S. Corn yield would be somewhere around the mid 150 bushels area, well below the 160 bushels, which is the trend line for corn if we should have a normal year this year. We know there'll be a few states that meet the trend, maybe a couple that are above. But in the western half of the Corn Belt, we expect the crop to be somewhat below the trend.
You were talking a lot about 1947 and sort of how this crop is trending along, or the weather was trending along with it. As you look at the crop, does it look as rough as what we see online or what we read online?
We always seem to get the very worst looking fields when we see something published. People don't very often say, here's the worst in our neighborhood, here's the best, here's some average. They just put the worst one in. So for the most part, things really aren't quite as bad as they appear. When we hear the amount of crop in good to excellent condition, and if the total acres in good to excellent condition for your crop reporting district is above 50% in the good to excellent class, you are headed for, at this time, an above trend line yield.
Our full interview with Elwynn is available online and through our mobile app. It's important to note the August crop report already estimated Illinois would overtake Iowa in soybean production for the first time since 2003. The Rural Futures Institute was started at the University of Nebraska nearly a year ago. Now approaching year 2 and its second national meeting, Ronnie Green explains the impetus of starting the Rural Futures Institute and the value of this year's conference.
The idea of the Institute is to marshal all of the resources across the University of Nebraska system to really think out what the rural landscape will need to be in the Great Plains and beyond 50 years from now, 75 years from now. So what are the big issues impacting rural sustainability? We had the very first National Rural Futures Conference in May of 2012 here in Lincoln, and it was a great dialogue at that time about the things we were thinking about informing the Rural Futures Institute. So asking thought leaders around the world of the need for this, what we could accomplish through forming such an institute. Now we're pleased that the second National Rural Futures Conference, now that the Institute has been formed, will be held here in a few weeks. We're looking forward to a second conversation now about what some of those issues are that communities are dealing with and having communities involved in that discussion with us again with people from around the world.
The 2013 Rural Futures Conference will take place November 3rd through the 5th in Lincoln. Registration is now open. We'll link to the organization's website on the Market Journal homepage if you're interested in finding more information or attending. Nebraska has one of the highest 4-H enrollment rates in the country. 1 of every 3 Nebraska young people is engaged in 4-H in some way. An article in the September Nebraska Farmer details the popularity and growth of 4-H in Nebraska. 4-H here in this state focuses on 5 main themes: science, healthy living, career development, leadership and citizenship, and agricultural literacy. You'll find much more about Nebraska's top youth programs, 4-H and FFA, in the September Nebraska Farmer. Nebraska's corn crop seems to be in excellent shape under irrigation, but poor shape when without. The latest state report showed irrigated corn improving to 82% in good to excellent categories, but falling to only 39% in the same categories under dryland situations. Corn dented was listed at 51%, 19 points behind the average and 40 percentage points below last year. Some producers have already begun chopping corn for silage to use as another feed source for livestock. This week, we talked with UNL Extension beef feedlot specialist Galen Erickson about the ideal time to cut silage and how to ensure you get the best quality and quantity for your operation.
Well, silage season is just starting. You know, there's some keys that people should look at. Most times they judge it based on kernel maturity. So if we're a little behind this year on corn maturity, we see a lot of choppers starting this week, next week. So we're about a week behind normal. I think a lot of people are interested in putting up silage because of the benefits of use of silage for beef cattle. But we probably saw more last year because they were trying to salvage some drought acres than what we'll probably see this year.
You mentioned that we were behind. Let's talk about timing. When is the ideal time or one of the perfect times to cut that silage?
You know, the old recommendations are you look at milk line on that kernel and you judge it. And the old recommendations were 2/3 milk line, half milk line, maybe starting then. I prefer that people use moisture and dry matter, and so I think targeting 35% dry matter, hopefully that's at least 3/4 milk line or even just starting black layer, because our focus now more recently has been how do we get it as mature as possible but still have enough moisture for good fermentation.
The moisture there is the operative kind of...
Yeah, to get it packed well and fermented well, we think starting when it's about 35% dry matter or 65% water, and you don't want to get drier than 40% dry matter or 60% water, because then you have a hard time packing it, getting the air out, and making sure it ferments well.
This year's a little different than last year. In the eastern half of Nebraska, the drought isn't quite as severe as it was last year, but also corn price isn't nearly as high as it was last year. When you look at the competitiveness of the pricing of silage versus corn, what do you see?
Yeah, you know, we've revisited this because there's really not been a lot of focus on silage, but when corn jumped up, silage was much more attractive to us, and especially when forage supplies were low. Forage supplies are fairly large this fall. Corn's been dropping, and so silage is not as logical as it was before. We still think it can be economical. In our opinion, it's 7.65 times the corn price when it's standing in the field. And then you've got to account for losses and harvest costs and such to get to a good price delivered to the cattle. And that varies, frankly. A ratio is not always the best because it varies depending upon corn price.
So that 7.65 multiplier doesn't account for the extra costs.
Right, that's when it's standing in the field. You've got to add in a harvest and packing, and also have to handle shrink in that calculation. So there's a lot of information available on our webinar about this, but it gets pretty detailed, and everybody wants a ratio, but as corn gets cheaper, that ratio is impacted quite a bit.
Tell me about shrink and how important that is to determining what you're going to get out of it.
Well, for sure. Once you have your bunkers packed, it's just critical to cover them. You know, I'd encourage people to look at the data on various inoculants, make sure they're data-driven decisions. But you can go from being economical with 5 to 10% shrink to it not being economical with 15 to 20% shrink. So managing those relatively small changes and losses is important. And I would argue shrink is not just fermentation losses like people talk about. It's inaccurate weighing, inaccurate scales, spilling, tossing out the spoiled material. So people need to really pay attention and manage shrink and try and keep it to 10% or less.
We're very early and the crop is behind, but any signs or hints of mycotoxins or nitrates, anything like that that you've heard of so far?
Well, last year there was a much bigger concern for nitrates probably than this year. but it does depend a little bit on rainfall right now. And so we could have some nitrate challenges. And so I would encourage producers that if they have some drought stressed areas, that's probably prime areas to test for nitrate if they're harvesting it for silage. Good thing is when it goes through the ensiling process, nitrate levels do decrease some, but it's fairly inexpensive and easy to test. No, I haven't heard of any mycotoxin concerns, and we'll just have to wait and see how this harvest develops. I suspect historically Nebraska corn's good quality and we won't have much mycotoxin concern.
As Galen mentioned, UNL Extension has produced webinars on silage use and pricing. We'll link to those discussions on our website in case you're interested in seeing more detailed information. If you're concerned about nitrates in drought-damaged crops or other forages, you can bring a sample to Husker Harvest Days, where UNL Extension will be offering free testing. You're encouraged to bring a representative sample from the feedstuffs with the greatest risk. You can drop off your samples at the Big Red Building on 3rd Street, conveniently located near the Market Journal exhibit. As we mentioned a few weeks ago, significantly large portions of Nebraska were recently affected by hail that damaged corn and soybean fields. Those fields could now be opened up for other potential problems. If you're in those areas, UNL Extension plant pathologist Tamara Jackson-Ziems says you may want to scout your cornfields for evidence of stalk rot.
You know, we've got a lot of hail damage in Nebraska this year in particular, and it stretches all the way in parts of northern Nebraska all the way down into south central Nebraska, where maybe the worst hit areas are. And so these hail damaged fields have a wide range of severity. Some are completely destroyed and can't be salvaged, but others are more moderate to less severe.
What are some of those things that would be a problem area for farmers in those areas?
Well, most immediately, before people consider harvesting, they need to be aware that the wounds are going to allow pathogens like stalk rot pathogens to come in, and so the risk for lodging is much higher in those fields.
How can they test to see if stalk rot is going to be a problem?
Well, we recommend scouting and finding out which high-risk fields have the worst potential for lodging, and going through and doing that simple push or pinch test to see which stalks are the weakest, and then prioritizing which fields should be harvested first before they do lodge.
Elaborate for me on the pinch and push test. What do they need to do?
Well, we recommend walking through a large portion of a field, and especially focusing on areas that may be at higher risk. And so areas that may have been hit worst by hail or have other damage, or have lost a lot of leaf area due to foliar diseases. And so testing those stalks, you can quickly do it by walking down the row and pushing the stalks, the plants, at arm's length. And if those stalks don't snap back up right and they do go on and fall over, then those are ones that are prone to lodging later.
And pinching?
Pinching, just what you might imagine, and so we recommend just going along and squeezing them down probably a couple nodes or internodes from the ground up. You're more likely to find it down in that area.
Next week, we'll talk again with Tamara about ear molds after hail and how they can cause major storage issues for farmers. As for the damage in the state, based off planted acres, UNL Extension educator Jenny Reese says Nebraska's Clay County suffered an estimated 170,000 damaged acres of corn and more than 87,000 acres of soybeans from recent hail. Now with his latest weather forecast, here's UNL Extension state climatologist Al Dutcher.
Well, folks, here we are again for the weekly forecast. This last week brought in some cool conditions at the beginning of the weekend, and then of course we've seen that slow buildup of heat, especially across eastern Nebraska, where we moved from the 80s into the 90s. Western Nebraska, of course, flirted with the 90s all week, and we did have quite a few locations that seen several days of low 100-degree readings. Thunderstorm activity, the main brunt of it, of course, with the cold frontal passage that came through late last weekend into early Monday time frame, would dump some respectable precipitation totals across portions of southeastern Nebraska. Then we dealt with these little small pockets of thunderstorm activity throughout central Nebraska and extreme eastern Nebraska during the latter half of this past week. Now, as we go forward in time, of course, we are looking for the heat once again to rebuild into the region, and that looks, according to the models, to hold on for about the next 10 days. Not terrifically hot, but certainly we will be well above normal before we are looking at signs of a very significant cold air mass trying to work its way down from Canada as we get into the time period around the 18th to the 20th of the month. So let's take a look at what we expect over this next 7-day period. And as we go to the upper air models, one thing we can see is that once again we have this ridge built in across the country, and it's going to be very warm today. In fact, we were looking at 90s across the state. It doesn't look like any precipitation. So if you're going to the Husker game this afternoon at 5 o'clock start time, I would expect that temperatures are going to be in the low 90s, and by the time the game's over, we'll probably slip down into the mid 80s. So it's going to be a little hot out there, just like last week. With this earlier start, we're going to have to deal with a couple extra hours of sitting in that very hot, uncovered sun, basically, and sweating to death. But outside of that, most of the moisture will be shifting well to the north of us. And as we go to tomorrow, what we're going to notice is that high pressure system is starting to shrink in regards to this trough trying to move into the northern plains. And that's going to be slow to arrive into our region. So we are expecting fairly dry conditions on Sunday. If we see any thunderstorm activity, it's probably going to be isolated to the panhandle in north central Nebraska. Now, as we get to Monday, we'll start to see that high pressure system starts to push off to the southeast, and here's this front that's going to be moving across the northern plains. So the vast majority of the precipitation on Monday is going to be associated with the Dakotas. Some of that might be able to slip in as we get into Monday evening across the panhandle, and then as we progress through the day on Tuesday, we'll start to see that trough moving its way through here, and that offers our best opportunity for widespread precipitation across the state. And some of that may linger across southeastern Nebraska into Wednesday morning as that trough kind of shifts to our east and starts to funnel the cooler air well to our east. We'll start to see the ridge rebuilding, and the conditions will start to warm up rather dramatically. And in fact, as we get into Thursday, we'll start to see that high pressure system build once again, and that will continue on into the day on Friday, and it'll be early into the next week before we start to see any significant cool weather moving in. So in terms of the precipitation and temperature forecast, there's some isolated thunderstorm activity expected, but for the most part, the main brunt will come in on Tuesday. Temperatures will be very, very warm this weekend, cooling during the middle part of next week, and then a slow gradual warm up. 8 to 14-day forecast indicates above normal temperatures, once again, for most of the western United States. And as we get from next week to the following Tuesday, pretty much dry weather in eastern Nebraska, wet toward western Nebraska.
Thanks, Al. Today's interviews with Mike Briggs, Elwynn Taylor, Galen Erickson, and Tamara Jackson-Ziems are available individually on the Market Journal website and through our mobile app as part of the September 6th episode. Next week, we'll look at the numbers in September's crop report, and Tamara Jackson-Ziems will discuss ear molds in corn as we report from the 2013 Husker Harvest Days near Grand Island. Until then, thanks for watching. I'm Jeff Wilkerson. We'll see you next week.
Join Market Journal online at marketjournal.unl.edu. You can also follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine. Funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board. The Soybean Checkoff, growing opportunity from the ground up. Market Journal is produced by the University of Nebraska Lincoln Extension, where you can know how, know now. Funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board.
Animal agriculture is vital to Nebraska. Livestock production not only contributes to our food supply, but also helps our rural communities. Livestock provides revenue for schools, creates jobs, supports Main Street, and enhances the future for farm families. The Nebraska Soybean Board's Animal Agriculture Initiative works to encourage growth of responsible livestock enterprises to benefit agriculture and Nebraska.